Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, Surah Hud, chapter 11. We will cover verses 96 to 109 today. Allah's laws are immutable and these work 24/7. These are the references, and this is our contact in case there is a query or question regarding this presentation or our previous presentations. Summary of verses 84 to 95, which we covered last time. Here is given the account of the people of Madian to whom the messenger Shuaib was sent from among themselves to provide guidance via the wahi of Allah. We have covered this account in brief about the messenger Shuaib and his people. These people were indulging in wrongdoing along with many other crimes as they were unjust in their business dealings within their economic system. They did not observe the rules in relation to giving full measure and weight in the buying and selling of goods amongst each other. We know that buying and selling, there are some kind of rules even under the man-made system. But of course, the Quran goes into far more finer details than the man-devised systems. The Quran declares this to be a heinous crime according to the law of requital, and such nations attract severe punishment for these crimes of theirs. Next, the messenger Shuaib warns them about these malpractices and asks them to desist. He also invites them to the system of salat, which they initially think is merely some kind of ritual for religious worship. However, when he explains the correct meaning to them, they are taken aback. They refused to accept his invitation to Salat as they did not wish to apply it to the distribution of their wealth and possessions under the direction of the wahi of Allah. The nation of Shuaib rejected the guidance of Allah and did not reform their unjust tyrannical system because they did not give it any significance. They just followed their desires. They did not believe, they did not have conviction in the law of requital. So they were ultimately eliminated by the total annihilation of their habitations, because the results of human deeds, they do not wait indefinitely that people will take their own time and come to these. And when these are applied collectively, because individually in any case people die, but collectively, of course, it takes longer for these collective actions, collective outcomes to manifest themselves. The messenger Shuaib and the Momineen were saved from this destruction as per the law of Allah. Summary of verses 96 to 109. The messenger Musa came to Pharaoh and his people with the guidance of Allah. However, they rejected the message. The consequence of this rejection was that they continued to follow the evil path of theirs, which took them to ruin and destruction in this life, and consequently their hereafter was also ruined. The accounts of former nations are noted in the Quran for people to learn lessons from and to obey the laws of Allah instead. Allah does not do injustice to any people. It is people who do injustice to themselves when they choose to follow the wrong paths in life. Everything in the universe follows Allah's laws. Only man has choice and intent, and he can either follow his unbridled desires or follow the guidance revealed through the wahi of Allah. This guidance is now preserved in the Quran for all times. As far as this worldly life is concerned, man has a finite physical life which ends with death. He can live life thinking it will end with death, in which case his self will never develop, hence he will have nothing in the hereafter. Those who make the choice to live life in the light of the guidance of the Quran can acquire a developed self, and thus lead a life as defined by Allah in detail in His book. Now we will look at the first two verses for today's presentation, 96 and 97. The accounts of the messengers demand our profound attention. وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا مُوسَى بِآيَاتِنَا وَسُلْطَانٍ مُبِينٍ إِلَى فِرْعَوْنَ وَمَلَئِهِ فَاتَّبَعُوا أَمْرَ فِرْعَوْنَ وَمَا أَمْرُ فِرْعَوْنَ بِرَشِيدٍ. And in this way, we sent Musa with our laws and clear authority to Pharaoh and his leaders. They did not accept the invitation of Musa and kept obeying the commands of Pharaoh, even though the commands of Pharaoh were totally based on tyranny and had no relevance to rational thinking and reasoning either. And we see it even in today's world. People know that the leaders of their countries are not following the correct path, but they still willingly follow it. And very few are the ones who stand up against the system or raise their voice against the system. Further elaboration of these two verses, having briefly described some of the accounts of previous messengers and their nations, the Quran here notes another important aspect of the wahi of Allah. The messenger Musa was sent with the signs of Allah, which had the potential of possessing power. And that's an important point for us, that when Quran says that the book and Sultan, that is, there is a power attached with that, that means this message is not merely a sermon. It also guides us and provides power in case we follow this message. The message of Allah was conveyed to Pharaoh and his cohorts who held power, but they rejected the message thinking, what can Musa do? Not realizing that when Allah's message is conveyed by those who communicate with the force of the conviction of Iman, it acquires a new dimension of higher strength. This point requires very careful reflection, and hopefully this will come up in subsequent presentations. The people obeyed Pharaoh because he possessed physical power in the land, and this power of his was in direct opposition to the guidance of Allah. Hence, it had no legitimacy according to the laws of Allah. We have gone through this aspect of the time of respite. When human beings do not follow Allah's laws, then essentially they have certain time of respite defined according to what they are doing in the world and to what degree they are defying the laws. But ultimately, they are in loss. The Quran sums up the state of the power of Pharaoh by declaring it to be Wama Amro Firauna be Rashid. The path pursued by him was not of rushd, and the time had arrived to cut it short. And rushd means Sirat-e-Mustaqim, the path which takes us to the system of Deen in this life, which is free from any fear and grief, and then it is connected with the life of the hereafter. And this is the path which is defined within the permanent values of the Quran. Next two verses, 98 and 99, the Quran guides us on finer aspects of the path of Deen. Yaktumu qawmahu yawmal qiyamati fa'awradahumun nara wa besal virdul morud wa utbeu fi hazihi lanatan wa yawmal qiyamati besar rifdul marfud. We told Musa that there is no need to worry. When Bani Israel will rise up with you, then he, that is Pharaoh, will come forward with his people in opposition to them and will lead them himself. That is, he will be leading the opposing army. And in this way will take them to the trough of ruin and destruction, and that will be a very bad trough indeed, which these people will reach. This will be their same state in the life of the hereafter, where he, that is Pharaoh, will take his nation to Jahannam. Of course, because he was leading them over here, and of course he is going to lead them over there as well, because they all will be together. Consequently, this is what happened. That nation became deprived of the bounties of this life as well as of the prosperities of the life of the future. What a calamitous reward for someone to receive for their toil and effort. It is not that these people do not make effort. They make a lot of effort, very strenuous efforts to follow their vain desires. But since they are following the wrong path, so despite their efforts, they end up in wrong place. But when the toil and effort itself is in the wrong direction, then how can its reward be pleasant? Few more reflections on these two verses. What is noted here in these two verses is exactly what occurred with Pharaoh and those people who followed him. We remember Pharaoh was destroyed by drowning, and together with his army. And after that, the decline started in his empire. The messenger Musa was told that the moment a Jamaat Momineen becomes created among the people of Bani Israel, events will start to shape together and go against Pharaoh. Some of these aspects we did cover in some detail in Surah Yunus. The outcome of his evil deeds caught up with him as noted in the verse, and he took his people into the fire which he had kindled all along. He was killed with his army, and his dynasty declined and became erased from the face of the earth. The Quran has summed it up in another verse where it says, كَذَلِكَ وَأَوْرَثْنَا Bani Israel. That is, this was so, and this is a law of Allah. We made Bani Israel inheritors of this all. Because this is related to the rise and fall of nations, that the people who do not follow Allah's laws ultimately end up, initially they decline and then they become destroyed, and some other people follow them and take over the same lands and their properties and their places of habitations. Pharaoh took his people to a market where there was none to buy their produce. And when we look at worldly gains in the light of the life of the hereafter, as noted in the Quran, then all the individual and collective efforts of human beings who are on the wrong path become truly worthless. Each passing day in this life leaves behind a reminder that this is a temporary abode, and any focus on physical existence is finite. And eternity is for the human self only if it acquires new life by following the procedure and process noted in the Quran. These aspects we have covered in detail in our previous presentations, and we can have a look on those. Next two verses, 100 and 101, the issues which the human intellect cannot grasp at its own are explained. ذَلِكَ مِنْ نَبَّإِ الْقُرَى نَقُصُّهُ عَلَيْكَ مِنْهَا قَائِمٌ وَحَصِيدٌ وَمَا ظَلَمْنَاهُمْ وَلَكِنْ ظَلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ فَمَا أَغْنَتْ عَنْهُمْ آلِهَتُهُمُ الَّتِي يَدْعُونَ مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ لَمَا جَاءَ أَمْرُ رَبِّكَ وَمَا زَادُهُمْ غَيْرَ تَتْبِيبٍ. These are accounts of some among the nations from the past which we are narrating to you. Some of these habitations are still present while others have become annihilated. You will have seen from their state of affairs that we did not do any kind of injustice to anyone. They did wrong to their own selves when they adopted obedience to non-Allah powers by leaving aside the laws of Allah. Now, this aspect we had gone through in a considerable detail under Surah Yunus. Over here, we should always keep in mind that it is human beings who do injustice to themselves. Because according to the law of Mukafat, each one of us responsible for their own conduct in this life, and since nations are formed by the collection of individuals, hence nations also become responsible for what they do collectively. Hence, when the time for the outcome of their deeds arrived, then those non-Allah powers whose commands they used to obey and had taken to be their gods were of no use to them whatsoever. Disobedience of them could do nothing more than this, that it became the cause for their destruction instead. Further comments on these two verses. Here the Quran has re-emphasized the importance of these historical accounts of previous nations who once lived on the planet and who, despite possessing the guidance of Allah, decided to reject it. So their physical stay was cut short to make way for the Jamaat Momineen. It is not that these nations did not possess intellect and reasoning. They had tremendous intellect and reasoning, the Quran states at a number of places, but they abused them. They worked outside the permanent values of Wahi, and messengers did come to them and guided them. For example, in today's world, the Quran is present, and even those who call themselves Muslims, and they do read as well, they do not wish to follow the guidance of the Quran. And that is something which we have discussed previously as well. Since we have now the addresses of these verses, we need to look at these with full focus and single-mindedness. This includes relating these to the state of affairs existing in today's world. Whether relics of past nations still exist or not, or their ruins display their sorry tale from the past or not, the fact is that history narrates the tale of the functioning of the law of requital of Allah. And there are numerous books written on this aspect. For example, the fall of the Roman Empire. There are also documentaries and films made on that. So it is not that human beings do not know what happened in the past. It is that people do not wish to follow the laws of Allah, and they wish to follow their unbridled desires. Next, the Quran emphatically declares to us that Allah did not do injustice to any one of them. And this is an evidence-based fact. They did injustice to themselves because they opted to follow the wrong paths in life. Thus, whenever we relate any events in the world to Allah, we need to keep this permanent value in mind and look for those causes which contribute to these events. So we should always look for causes in this word and not say that it is Allah who's done it. Of course, in the Quran, these things are related to him in some of the verses, but we have to use our intellect and reasoning to figure it out, that how the law of requital and the law of respite functions in human world. Let us list the signposts on their wrong paths. Firstly, their decisions and deeds create problems in every aspect of human life for mankind locally as well as across the world. Secondly, they create classes and parties, create wars, conflicts, chaos, and divisions as part of those man-devised systems which they visibly prop up and support. Thirdly, they are repeatedly warned by intellectuals, the poor, deprived, and exploited, even some among their own ranks. Fourthly, they run the systems with the assumption that human life ends with death and there is no accountability for their actions in the world. Let us go to the next slide. Fifthly, they use all kinds of media manipulations and other techniques to coerce the public and form an opinion in their favor. And people generally do not have time to think of any better option in their life, because so many problems are created for them that they are all the time struggling to make ends meet. There's a lot more to it, but we can figure this out through our self-study. Being students of the Quran, it is our duty to know as much about man-devised systems as possible, which is called to become a modern man, i.e., be aware of the state of the world in which we live. The Quran has referred to the human self and has summed up the whole issue by stating that they did not follow the laws of Allah, and as a result, the law of Rububiyyat had to act in order to make way for the Jamaat Momineen. And this thing is conditional as well, because we as students of the Quran have gone through these accounts of previous nations. And unless a Jamaat Momineen emerges and is formed and becomes strengthened, then we should not expect that some significant change will rapidly take place in the outer world, because the Quran points to the existence of Jamaat Momineen for that condition to be met within the time scale in which that Jamaat wishes it to take place. If we want quick results, then Jamaat Momineen has to emerge and become strengthened and work in the world and spread the message of Allah. Addressing the Momineen, the Quran states that once you emerge as a force, then rest assured that the scale of the law of requital becomes accelerated. The people on the wrong path keep adding to their evil burdens with each passing day, while salih deeds correspondingly keep strengthening the self's development. Let us go to the next three verses, 102 to 104. وَكَذَلِكَ أَخْذُ رَبِّكَ إِذَا أَخَذَ الْقُرَىٰ وَهِيَ ظَالِمَةٌ إِنَّ أَخْذَهُ أَلِيمٌ شَدِيدٌ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتًا لِمَنْ خَافَ عَذَابَ الْآخِرَةِ ذَلِكَ يَوْمٌ مَجْمُوعٌ لَهُ النَّاسُ وَذَلِكَ يَوْمٌ مَشْهُودٌ وَمَا نُؤَخِّرُهُ إِلَّا لِأَجَلٍ مَعْدُودٍ. Hence, keep in mind this established principle from these historical tales, that whenever a nation resorts to injustice and transgression, then the grip of the law of requital of Allah gets a hold of it, and this grip is very severe and chastising. In these accounts of former nations and in the immutability of the law of requital which has been mentioned above, there are clear signs for that nation which remains fearful due to awareness of the devastations and destructions of the future and wishes to avoid them. According to this same relentless law, the ruinous outcome of this nation will also be the same, O Rasool, which is opposing your invitation like this. The outcomes of this path of theirs will appear on that day when both parties will gather together in opposition to each other in the battlefield. And we know it did happen, that there were clashes between those who rejected the message of Wahi and Jamaat Momineen. This will be that day when the outcomes of the deeds will manifest in a tangible form, i.e., in such a way that all will be able to see physically. According to our law of requital, we are postponing that day for a stated term, but it will most certainly arrive. Because life is moving forward, it is extremely dynamic, and human actions, these these produce their outcomes. And when the collective outcomes reach a certain stage, then these are bound to manifest in the physical world as well. Let us look at some more details of these verses 102 to 104. After drawing our attention to the fact that Allah does not do injustice to mankind, it is people themselves who do injustice and then suffer the consequences. The Quran invites us to look at the severe, painful consequences human beings suffer in the world through their own acts. And we see these things in our present world as well. For example, the recent wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, even Yemen, and now in Ukraine are subjecting human beings living in that part of the world to an immense suffering. And not to talk of the suffering because of poverty, exploitation, movement of people, refugees, and exploitation. For example, in whole of Africa, there are horrendous economic problems. And same goes for many other, for example, so-called third world countries. Just reflect on the wording of the first verse, وَكَذَلِكَ أَخْذُ رَبِّكَ إِذَا أَخَذَ الْقُرَى وَهِيَ ظَالِمَةٌ. So the Quran over here says that Allah as a Rabb, and that is what we should concentrate on, because Rububiyyat has this element as well, that the people should be held accountable to that. And over here Quran says, وَهِيَ ظَالِمَةٌ, because of their injustices, they were held accountable. This is how human beings create misery in their life and in the world when they do not have the system of Rububiyyat. All are related to the system of gross injustice, which they create, promote, and continue to suffer under it, and then die with nothing in the hereafter. And this is something very serious, that we go through tremendous amount of fear, grief, and of course, other difficulties in this life. And when we know, and if we come to know that there is a better way of living this life, then those who have come to this side should make maximum effort to bring a change in the world. See the wording of the verse towards the end, Inna aqzahu alimun shadid, a painful existence and to this life full of fear and huzn, and then nothing in the hereafter. We need to look at the gravity of this aspect by bringing to mind the factual existence of the life of the hereafter. And we have seen that Quran goes into a great detail of many aspects of human psyche, and some it invites us to figure out ourselves. Why is all this occurring in the world before our very eyes? Because those who claim to have the book of Allah do not make any effort to study and understand it, and then strive for the system of Deen, despite the fact that the whole procedure for getting Allah's help is given here. I put in inverted commas on help because it is all related to the laws of Allah. And we have gone through these aspects a number of times before as well. Now, continuing in these three verses, the next verse points to the sign by stating that those who take into account the functioning of the law of requital and thus become fully conscious of their psyche and conduct, therefore holding themselves accountable at every moment of their life, are the ones who take heed of the Quranic guidance. The next part guides us on what happens in this world to those who oppose haqq and wish to promote batil. We know haqq means what produces constructive results for whole of mankind, and batil is which does not lead to positive results, which is not constructive. And we should not take it over here in a narrow sense. For example, an individual works hard, gets a job, and gets something good out of the man-made system. Over here, we should keep in mind the whole of the capitalist system, for example, and other man-made systems, that what exactly they are doing to every human being on the planet Earth. Ultimately, their deeds catch up with them and the battle lines become defined. We can see the outline of this in the future as and when the forces of haqq become strong and viable. The third verse provides assurance from the direction of Allah that the time of respite does come to an end in the case of an evil system. Therefore, the forces striving on the path of Allah should never ever think that the law of requital will not take their efforts into account. Next two verses 105 to 106 all takes place as per laws. Yawma yati la takallamu nafsun illa biznihi faminhum shakiyun wa sayyid. وَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ شَكُوا فَفِي النَّارِ لَهُمْ فِيهَا زَفِيرٌ وَشَهِيقٌ. At that time, all decisions will be according to the law of Allah, and no individual will be able to say even a word against it. Not like today that whoever requires some power, his word becomes law. Of course, all the people, all the rich people possessing wealth and who have influence on these parliaments and the congresses which formulate laws, they come together and formulate laws which favor them at the top. At that time, both groups will become clearly separated. Firstly, those who will become deprived of the bounties of life, and they will be very unfortunate. Because they will be unfortunate because this is something which they create themselves. Secondly, those who will be beneficiaries of those bounties, and they will be very fortunate. The fields of the efforts and deeds of those who are deprived of the bounties of life will become like ashes, because those deeds were such that they could only produce such outcomes. And for them, there will be lifelong wailing and sighing. Because once the time of respite ends, then essentially we do not have any more time left to mend our ways. It is only before the arrival of the end point we have to mend our ways and take the right path. Further reflection on these two verses, 105 and 106. Here the Quran has drawn on the use of our imagination and has stated in a dramatic way that a day will then definitely arrive when no self will be able to speak except within the law of Mashiach of Allah, i.e. those who tread on this path will not be surprised by the arrival of this time or era, as they will be waiting eagerly for it. For example, as students of the Quran, we have gone through these verses, and if this time of respite ends for the nations of today at some point in the future, then we will not be surprised. In fact, we will be expecting it to happen at some point in the future. Surprises in life belong to those who are caught unprepared. In the case of chronic students, there is no surprise as they keep their fingers on the pulse of passing time. The Quran helps us to remain aware of the path of our life and its signposts all along, and also keeps providing reassurance that to remain patient and firm on this path, individually and collectively. Through sharing these presentations and our own study as well individually, because we are now dispersed throughout the world and we only come together on this Zoom platform. So there is a lot we have to do at our own individually wherever we are. We have prepared ourselves for all eventualities, a great blessing of the guidance of Allah. Being caught unexpectedly or after rejecting the guidance of Wahi when caught in the outcomes of own evil deeds is the worst kind of shock in life. Let us go to the next verse, 107. Human life is a one-way street. خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا مَا دَامَتِ السَّمَاوَاتُ وَالْأَرْضُ إِلَّا مَا شَاءَ رَبُّكَ إِنَّ رَبَّكَ فَعَالٌ لِمَا يُرِيدُ. These are those nations in whom there remains no further ability for gaining life again, therefore destruction becomes imposed on them for all times. We remember this segment was started with the brief mention of people of Pharaoh. So over here, Quran says that once their time of respite ends, of course, then that is the end of it for them as far as this life is concerned. And of course, in their places, new nations will emerge and will take birth. Then they will have to carry out their own conduct and behavior in this world within the values they elect to follow. These laws have been formulated by your Rabb through his own choice and intent by keeping in view the whole program of the universe. Hence, no one can interfere in these, nor can he raise any objection to them. Very important point stated over here. I have highlighted Illa Ma Sha Rabbuka. And see, Rabb as an attribute has appeared over here. So we should look at it in relation to Rububiyyat, that this is how Allah wants the Rububiyyat to materialize. And why he's done it? Because that is the way it should be. And we can figure it out and we can see the rationale and reasoning behind it. Further reflections on this verse. This verse points to a few facts of worldly life. Firstly, in the physical world, if we know the laws, we can predict outcomes precisely. And if we insist on taking the wrong paths in life, then the outcomes will also be wrong. Secondly, in life as human beings, if we ignore Rububiyyat deliberately or unwittingly, the results will appear in the form of imbalances and chaos. And that is the state of the world as of today. If despite experiencing the wrong outcomes of our way of living in the world, we do not direct our thinking towards the guidance of Wahi, then nothing better will emerge in our world. Next, in order to benefit from the Wahi of Allah, we need to understand the structure of the system of Rububiyyat in all respects, i.e. its physical side as well as the side of the human self and its development. And concentrating on human self is very important because physical side human beings take notice very quickly because our physical needs are attached to that, and world being physical and the human systems being physical at a fundamental level, it's easier to concentrate on that. But it is the human self at which we should keep our focus when we are going through the Quran and relating it to the system of being and its development. These two are intrinsically linked as far as this worldly life of man is concerned. I've said this as far as this life because we do not know the state of our existence in the next life. Our self will remain the same with which we go over to the next life, but our other, that is our vehicle, our consciousness will depend on what medium we do not know at this point in time in this life. The last part of the verse points to an important aspect of Rububiyyat. Inna rabbaka fa'alul lima yurid. Or your Rabb is accomplisher of what he wishes or plans. And we can figure it out that why the system is working the way it is working. For example, we differentiate between Deen and the man-made system very clearly. Allah being Rabb has a clear plan of Rububiyyat of everything in the universe, because that is the purpose of Allah being Rabb, that whatever is created in the world, that should reach its point of desired objective or destination, or intended objective and destination. And the case of man, despite giving him choice and intent, this aspect of the system is before him all the time. The creation of the universe is directly linked to this fact. Next verse, 108, the choice of an eternal blissful life is placed within our easy reach. وَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ سُعِدُوا فَفِي الْجَنَّةِ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا مَا دَامَتِ السَّمَاوَاتُ وَالْأَرْضُ إِلَّا مَا شَاءَ رَبُّكَ عَطَاءً غَيْرَ مَجْزُوزٍ. The same wording is used over here, which I have highlighted here in the previous verse as well. Contrary to this, the prosperous nation will be showered with the bounties of life, and this process of bounties will never become severed. The same division will also remain in place in the life of the hereafter. Their blessings will be everlasting and uninterrupted. The process is explained over here. Following on from the previous verse here, Allah has addressed Momineen, assuring them that his being Rabb should be viewed in terms of their self-development and in relation to what is covered in the Quran from start to finish. Their appearance on the stage of the world through their own choice is linked to the creation of the universe, i.e., they are the ones who hold themselves fully accountable for their deeds, as noted, for example, in verse 45:22, which is in reference to the law of requital. Since they have managed to acquire new life through their own choice using the guidance of Wahi, hence they need to keep progressing on this path using the signs given in the Quran. Having got onto this straight path, they feel assured that the heavens and earth follow Allah's laws, and if they remain within the confines of these laws, then essentially they have linked their life to eternity. Earned through their own conduct, therefore no one can take it away from them. This is how the system of accountability functions in the world. Then the verse helps to elevate their hopes and expectations further when it declares, Illa ma sha rabbuka. Because everything is working according to laws, and when we conform our performance, our own conduct in consonance with the laws of Allah, then of course we become entitled for a good recompense for our deeds. And that is where the system of Deen comes in, because in terms of ourself, we develop it further. There is a lot more for Momineen under the aspect of Rububiyyat, because Quran states at another place, Lahum yasha'una fiha wala daina mazid, that they will get whatever, they will have whatever they wish for, and we have more to add as well. Because their desires are in line with the laws of Allah. They meet the threshold which is defined by the laws of Allah, and they remain within the permanent values, and they work for the system of Deen. And as they progress on that, they keep getting more and more rewards. And all these rewards are in relation to the development of their self. More reflections on this verse. The last part of the verse is another statement of fact in relation to the self's development. Here it is stated that these bounties of Allah will never sever, since the Momineen would have acquired these by following the laws of Allah. These are those rewards which are related to Iman and Saleh deeds. And these are tangible things. The changes which take place within us, and by coming together, these become visible physically as well. And these can never discontinue as long as we continue to remain on Sirat al-Mustaqim. In another place, this is noted as إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونٍ. Except those who accept Iman and do Saleh deeds, their reward will never cease. If we have gone through this surah, Surah Deen, in which Quran has first pointed to two aspects, Ashan Takween and Asfala Safilin, and then has said that those people who accept Iman willingly and then follow the path of Saleh deeds, then they are become entitled for an unceasing reward. If we move our mind away from the mechanical aspects related to material benefits in this life, we will grasp this point more precisely. For example, when we acquire a degree from a university or college, there are two parts to the reward. I've just quoted it, taking it from our day-to-day life in this world. And I thought it is better to illustrate it with an example. Firstly, we acquire knowledge, training, and experience in the process of getting this degree. Secondly, we also receive a paper degree as evidence of having completed the course. See, both parts are over here, the physical part as well as the part related to the self. The first aspect is related to our self-development in relation to this life, and the second aspect is detached from ourself, but is required to obtain benefits in this life, for example, a job, status, fame, etc. Or, for example, for further study. The part which becomes part of ourself will always stay there, even in the life of the hereafter. However, whatever becomes part of ourself based on Iman and Saleh deeds has the potential to keep growing eternally. Next verse, 11:109, the Quran keeps reminding us about the reality of our existence as human beings. La taku fi miryatin mimma yabudu haulai ma yabuduna illa kama yabudu abahum min qablu wa inna la muwaffuhum nasibahum ghayra manqus. Therefore, do not let any doubt enter your mind about the end of these people who, after abandoning Allah, bow down before other powers. They obey those same powers which were obeyed by their forefathers, which have already been mentioned above. Hence, whatever was their end, the same end will be faced by them too. Our law of requital provides recompense for every deed in full without any decrease or increase. Now, further elaboration of this verse from the foregoing discourse, the Quran sums up a few important points in this verse. Firstly, we are asked not to be in any doubt and uncertainty about what is being communicated here. We know that when doubts arise, these cannot be removed mechanically or emotively, as these keep coming back. These have to be dealt with psychologically through rationalization of their cause and origin. This is where Saleh deeds help to strengthen ourselves. And this is an important point which will be covered towards the end of Surah Hud as well, that good deeds replace bad deeds or the effects of bad deeds. Secondly, we observe people doing worship and obedience in line with their wrong beliefs, and we also witness their impact on society and the world in terms of a waste of human time and effort, and the delay it is causing in making any progress towards the system of Deen. And as a result, of course, people are suffering. The state of yatim and miskeen stays the same in the world. Thirdly, the Quran assures us that while this is going on in the human world, we need to persist on the selected path. And while remaining aware of the fact that these people are following the paths of their ancestors, we do become discouraged and distracted by all this. And we should not let this discourage us or distract us away from our path. Because if we do that, then we will become part of them. What should we keep doing? be convinced of this fact that the efforts of Jamaat Momineen will materialize into concrete results at some point of time in the future. Continuing from that, verse 109, let us expand the issue of obeying forefathers, the previous generations by people, despite the fact that we are aware of the problems from the past. The Quran refers to this theme again and again and reminds Momineen not to fall prey to this line of thinking. The only evidence available to us is of the past. The present is what we are going through and we wish to make it better. However, the only information available to us is something from the individual and collective past. We are also conscious of passing time and look at the past as a guide. Here the Quran tells us that if the past has been guided by the non-Deen values, then it cannot serve as a model for you, as the past based on relative values is going to make you suffer very soon, as the law of requital is going to catch up with the consequences from the past collectively. It then repeats the fact that human beings are accountable for every action in the world, and if the path chosen is wrong, then we cannot expect good in the world. Good can only be expected if the path chosen is in the light of Wahy of Allah. With that, we come to the end of this presentation. Thanks for your time and for sharing this today. Please feel free to share it with your contacts. You may like to subscribe for future talks related to the Quranic system of Deen.